If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. So today's episode it's the first one we've had in a while. It has been a while since I've had a birth story, and it was so great to chat to Elizabeth today. Elizabeth shares her story about becoming a parent through IVF after experiencing challenges with conception and recurrent miscarriage. She's from Southern Colorado in America, and she is also a beautiful member inside Fitness Mama. She's a business owner. She's got a business called Vinrock Media, and she's got a beautiful little healthy baby boy who was born in December 2022. So stick around for this episode with Elizabeth, because she really does share a beautiful story where she overcomes a lot of trials, and she also imparts some really, what I think is really helpful information to upcoming or pregnant women, but also women who are on their journey to becoming pregnant too. Before we do dive into this episode, I invite you to download a free checklist so you can gain clarity with this super quick and simple return to running checklist. If you're keen to get back into running after birth, you want to make sure you're on the right track to best support your body in returning to running after you have a baby. And as a women's health physio, this checklist encompasses everything I feel is so very important to consider during this important postpartum period. So download this free checklist at fitnessmama.com/running checklist. And the link is also in the show notes. Right. Let's dive into this beautiful episode with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today on the Fitness Mama podcast. It's an absolute honor to be able to chat to you about your journey. You've been an amazing member inside Fitness Mama, and I know you've got a beautiful story that you've offered to share. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to give back to this community because it was one that was super meaningful to me in my journey, and hearing other birth stories really helped me have confidence in my birth experience going into the room, and then also having a couple little challenges that popped up while I was in labor. It was a lot easier to navigate them because I'd heard so many stories. So I'm really excited to share mine.
So let's start with your journey to becoming pregnant, because I know this was a bit of a long road for you. But could you walk us through where you're at now and how that came about?
Yes.
I know it's a very open-ended question.
Yes. So I was 36 when I started trying to conceive. So I am an older mother. And for many people, 36, there's still plenty of fertility left at that age. But for me, my fertility declined kind of quickly, which we didn't discover until after we were trying for a while. And so early on in our conception journey, it took us a while to get pregnant for the first time. And then our first 3 pregnancies ended in very early miscarriages, all before 12 weeks. And so after that, we were told by our OB that she really recommended that we look into a fertility clinic and to get the opinion of a real expert on what we should do, because by that point I was 38 by the time we had the third loss. And so she said, at this point, your window really is closing. So let's get on it if you want to have babies.
And between 36 and 38, did you try anything to help with conceiving and with these miscarriages? Did you do anything different, I should ask?
I did change my eating from being calorie and weight maintenance focused to being more nutrition focused. So things like saying, okay, I'm actually going to get 7 servings of vegetables in a day, which is something that I'd never been able to do in the past, and really thinking about what I'm getting out of my food. And when I made that change, it was when we were able to start conceiving successfully. But I was a bit unusual because I was having consistent periods, right? So it wasn't an ovulation issue from what we could tell. And so there weren't many interventions that could be done.
Okay. And then you went to the fertility clinic at 38, and what did they suggest?
So when we went into the fertility clinic, I thought they were going to say, well, there's these 5 different paths we could take and you'll have to think about it. And I thought it'd be kind of this complicated thing. But when we went in, they said, well, at this point, most likely what's happening is an issue with egg quality. And one of the reasons we could guess that is with our third loss, it was very important to me to do testing on the products of conception. So I put a lot of effort into making sure that happened. And from that, we were able to learn there was a chromosomal issue with the fetus, and that had caused it. So, because the big question at the beginning is it that my body can't carry? Or is it a consistent issue that is happening with the fetus? And so once we identified it's most likely not an issue with carrying, our IVF doctor was able to say, if you want to solve this issue and you're not having an issue with ovulation, we probably should just do IVF and we should go straight there and we can start next month if you want to. And that really shocked me. That it was like, oh, so quickly we have to make a decision about what to do.
Yeah. And how, if you don't mind me asking, how were you feeling mentally? Having had 3 miscarriages in 2 years, how were you feeling?
So with our second loss, I knew, and while these losses were happening, it was also in the height of COVID. And we also experienced a house fire that displaced us out of our home for 6 months. So there was a lot going on, a lot of pain and loss in our lives. And so I knew with our second loss that I needed to get some help. So I reached out to a local counselor who runs a practice called Sweetgrass Therapy. And she does yoga therapy, Kundalini yoga, and EMDR. And I just came to her and said, I have just a lot happening and I just need help because I have a lot of grief and I can't let this grief stop me. I need to keep going if I want the life I want and the baby that I want. As you can hear my voice, I still feel a lot, but it's because life is rich, and the pain, there's a lot in grief, but there's also a lot in joy that I still carry with me. So with her help, that gave me a lot of strength to keep going, to have hope for the future. And this whole process also made me really answer the question very clearly of whether or not I wanted children. So before we started trying, I had always been a bit ambivalent about maybe if it happens, we'll just see, we'll just give it a go. And then when we went to the fertility clinic, I was like, okay, so we're going to invest a lot of time and money and energy and potential heartbreak into this. And so I need to sit down and just say, yes, I for sure, absolutely, this is exactly what I want to do with my life. And so I got to answer that question very clearly for myself, which gave me a great deal of clarity. I also was something that surprised me is I thought when I went into this clinic and they when they would if they were to tell me, Elizabeth, you're the problem. You're the reason this isn't happening because of egg quality, I thought I would be absolutely devastated. I thought that was just going to break my heart if that happened. And when we went into the meeting with the doctor, and she said, this is quite likely an egg quality issue. And I sat in that moment. I thought, wow, that's actually a lot easier to hear than I thought it was going to be. It didn't devastate me. It was kind of nice to have clarity on what the likely issue was. And I just thought, wow, fear of this moment, fear of being told what the problem was kind of kept me away from getting a diagnosis for a while. And this was not a moment I needed to be afraid of. Like, I had every capacity in the world to handle that. And there also was a solution that could help us solve that problem. And it was actually kind of a moment of peace as opposed to a moment that really destroyed me. So that was something that surprised me a lot.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. So knowing the likely issue, what was her suggestion then?
Yes. So she suggested going through IVF and testing the embryos for potential chromosomal issues before we transferred them. And so that was, they can do some diagnostic pieces, and every single clinic is different. So this is the clinic I went to. Every single clinic has a slightly different process, but my clinic was able to diagnose the likelihood of success. And they said, overall, people of your age with your issues, it's a 50-50, 50% walk out with success. And they also said, most likely you're going to have to do 2 rounds of IVF to get one healthy baby. And that also it was very helpful to have that clarity of, we can't just kind of mess around with this and see what happens. We have to say, we're gonna do this thing, and it might take 2 rounds and it might take years to get to success, but let's go down that path. And for my husband and I to choose to go down it together.
Yeah. Okay. And I know we could talk a lot about this, and I also want to get to your pregnancy and recovery. You've got an amazing story to tell, Elizabeth. But did you end up getting pregnant on the first or second cycle?
Yes. So in our first cycle, we were lucky enough to have 2 healthy embryos retrieved. And that we thought it would take 2 cycles to get to that. So we had 2 embryos. And we were successfully pregnant after the very first frozen embryo transfer. And now that little baby is 4 months old. And we are just absolutely delighted with him. And we still have our other sweet embryo on ice. And we are counting the days until we get to transfer that one. So,
I can hear the joy in your voice. It's beautiful. So you became pregnant, this long-awaited pregnancy. How were you feeling at that point?
Because we'd had losses early in the pregnancy, there was still a lot of emotional challenge to just getting into the joy. So I continued to practice a lot of meditation, a lot of yoga therapy to help me kind of basically survive the pull between fear and joy. And I think it wasn't until probably week 20 that I really started to feel a great deal of confidence that I could think about the future. So before that, I really focused on the joy of every single day. So even though I didn't know what tomorrow held, I knew that this day, I was pregnant and I had this sweet little baby in me. And I got to love him fully in that day, at least. And so I really tried to lean into that and treasure that.
Sorry, I don't mean to make you upset again.
No,
Elizabeth.
I love it. I feel so much. There's so much joy. I know there's tears in my eyes and tears in my voice, but part of it is because that was quite honestly one of the happiest times of my life too. And obviously now having the baby, I'm even more overwhelmed with joy, but that was coming out of so much pain and getting to have so much joy, just to love him. It was wonderful, even though it was challenging.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months. Yes, that's 9 months. They also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. And the reason I asked that question is because I know a lot of women are going through the same thing as you. And to hear what you just mentioned then about trying to enjoy each day as it comes, I know that takes so much strength of character, but it sounds like it was also an amazing coping mechanism for you, and that's really what helped you get through one day at a time.
Absolutely.
So that's lovely to hear. So from 20 weeks on, you started to think more about the birth of your baby and that this was perhaps becoming a reality. How did you start to, what was going through your mind in terms of wanting to prepare for labour? So, until this point, you hadn't really gotten to this stage, and now you're thinking, okay, it looks like I'm excited to potentially give birth to this baby. So how did the shift happen, and what did you do to help get yourself ready for birth and this shift in mindset as well?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really believe in is hearing the stories of people who have come before you. And so I started to look for podcasts where people are sharing their birth stories, and Fitness Mama is one of them that I found. And those were absolutely invaluable to me, even the ones, or I would say especially the ones that involve challenge or traumatic experiences within labor, because I got to hear the stories of women who had gone through that and survived, or even women who had experienced, terrible things like placental abruptions and stillbirths, and they had still survived. And so hearing those stories was super, super helpful. And I also started to, focus a lot on my body, but trying to do that in a very health-oriented way as opposed to like a weight-oriented way. And one of the things that's important to me, again, because I'm aging and because I have another embryo, I wanted this birth to go really, really smoothly. And I wanted to recover quickly. And I wanted to be able to start the process for the next embryo. And so because of that, I was really looking for something that would help me stay active, because I tend to be a very active person. I'm an endurance runner. I love to lift weights. And I had stopped all of that through probably after the first loss, just because my focus was elsewhere. And so I was trying to find a way to come back to loving my body in that way. And the Fitness Mama community helped me with that, because I was also extremely concerned about abdominal wall separation, which I don't know. Looking back now, I'm like, it would have been fine if that happened. But I really wanted to minimize that because I wanted to have a very short recovery time between my 2 pregnancies. So I knew I didn't have a long time to get myself back and fit. And so I was really desperately looking for programs that were not hardcore, crazy things, but were things that would really focus on preparing for labor and also get my pelvic floor ready, partly because I've had issues with kind of an overactive pelvic floor, and I did not want a C-section, and I knew it was likely. My OB was already talking about wanting to induce me, which I know can delay getting dilated. And so I was like, I really have to learn to release this. And so those are the things that I started to focus on.
Yeah, interesting. And did you do, I don't know if this is big in America, but anything like calm birthing or hypnobirthing, any other sorts of?
I did a little bit of hypnobirthing training through this book that I read called Feng Shui Mama. And I listened to a whole lot of different podcasts and different things. I wouldn't say I never got into any of them enough to say like, oh, I knew it enough to use it. But I think it all kind of gave me little bits and pieces to use. I also took a birthing class through our local hospital, and that was a real game changer for me because one of my biggest concerns was honestly the labor and delivery nurses, because in the healthcare system in the US, they're doing 90% of the care during a labor. And I just thought, gosh, what if they're mean? What if they don't like me or how I want to do things? And so when I went and took the training at our local hospital and I met one of the head labor and delivery nurses, and everything she was talking about was exactly the type of birth I wanted to have. And so, and for me, I wanted to be in a high medical environment, being advanced maternal age with the IVF experience. Like I wasn't kind of like, I want to do a home birth. I want to do a water birth. I was like, put me in a hospital, have all the doctors around me to intervene if necessary. And so once I got that connection with our labor and delivery nurse and I got to tour the ward, I just really had a great deal of confidence at that point.
Oh, that's great to hear. And did you do the things like the perineal massage
So I had this whole list of things.
Did you do the...
of things.
I'm just wondering, did you actually do that preparing for labour workshop inside Fitness Mama? Interested.
Right. So I didn't do, I don't think I did that specific. I think I did do the training and I did the massage like 2 or 3 times. And I was kind of like, you know what, I'll just tear. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. Because I just, at that point, it was so hard to reach. And there was so much going on. But it did help me. To me, a lot of the preparation was doing the exercises. So like your Fridays that you do. Super helpful, and particularly the relaxation. And then also thinking about the pelvic floor, how you say zip up the back passage, right? And the different elements of the pelvic floor and the way that you explain that is super, super helpful. Because my number one priority when I got into the labor room is I want to dilate quickly and have like a reasonably length labor, especially if I have induction. And so a lot of the training you do on pelvic floors really helped me with that.
And I will just jump in, because if you're listening to this and like Elizabeth, you're not alone. Perineal massage, it can be hard to reach. Sometimes just the thought of it is just not what appeals at that stage of pregnancy. I totally get it. But that's where I think some of those other strategies, like what you talked about, learning how to release and relax and learning how to open it all up, so to speak. So zipping up and the strength is important for the afterbirth recovery aspect, but that learning to let go is also super important. So it's not just about the perineal massage. If you're listening today and you're thinking, I don't want to do that either, it's like, don't worry, because there's lots of other strategies that have been found to be helpful. So Elizabeth, can you talk us through when you first, or did you first go into labour? Like, talk us through the day or the day before what your beautiful baby was delivered.
Yes. So my OB wanted to induce me in week 39 because I was advanced maternal age and IVF. And I really did not want to be induced. And so we had some extensive conversations and agreed that I would be induced in halfway through week 40 if I hadn't given birth by then or hadn't gone into labor by then. So a couple days before my due date, I went in and I had a membrane sweep, which really helped. I was like 1.5 dilated at that point. And the next day I took a long walk, and that's when I lost my mucus plug. And then I was like, okay, we're getting real close. And then on my due date, I went into labor that evening. And so I did not have to be induced. And it was about a 10-hour long labor from labor starting to giving birth. And my dream happened where I dilated very quickly. And I felt all like I knew what my body was supposed to be doing, that I was supposed to be dilating. I was supposed to be releasing. I was supposed to be relaxing. And it just made such a difference to even the exhaustion of labor. It went so quickly that I'm delighted in how my birth turned out.
Yeah, great. So it's sounding like, so you went into hospital at what stage? Like how long did you stay at home for?
Yes. So I was just sitting in my chair all day, and I thought I might be having a contraction, but I thought contractions were at the top of the belly as opposed to being more in the pelvic area. And all of mine was in the pelvic area. So I was like, it's probably not it. But then around 5:00, I experienced what I thought was my water breaking. And so we called the hospital, and they said, if you want to know for sure, come on in. So we spent a couple hours getting ready, and then we went into the hospital. So it was probably about 2 hours after I thought that that my water had broken. But when we got there, we found out my water hadn't broken. I just had a contraction that had made me lose a little bit of control. But I walked around the hospital hallways for a couple hours, and they checked me again. And I was I think they said I had advanced from a dilated at 3.5 to being closer to a 5 or a 6. And so they were ready to admit me to the hospital at that point. So I thought I was going to have a lot more time at home, but we didn't really have much time at home once it started. And I think it was around 11:00 at night that I was admitted to the hospital. And about an hour after that was when I'd always known that I wanted an epidural. So around midnight, I requested the epidural, and I was already dilated to like 7 or 7.5 at that point. So it was just really, really quick. Got the epidural in right away, and pretty much instantly the pain kind of went away. And it was just amazing. It worked really well for me. So after that epidural was put in, I had an hour of the most blissful sleep that I've ever had in my life. So like during the most intense part of labor, I actually got to sleep through it, which was amazing. So I woke up refreshed and ready to go. And then my midwife came in, or the midwife that was on call. And she said, we're going to give it about 1 more hour, and then we're going to start pushing. And that hour was so interesting because I became very, very stressed. I started being like, I think I'm too numb. I think I'm not going to be able to push effectively. I can't feel my legs. And I just felt this huge surge of anxiety. And later, what I realized is that actually was adrenaline. So that was the hormone coming into my body, the adrenaline, telling me it's about time to push this baby out. Mm-hmm. And I had heard about that happening, but I had always heard of it in the context where women were in pain. So they'd say like, oh, I can't make it. This is too painful. I don't know if I'm going to survive this. Right. But I wasn't in any pain. I still just had this extreme anxiety that came, I think, because of the adrenaline. And so then
that was your transition. Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that till I look back on it. So know that if you're someone who gets pain medication like I do, you might still experience that. And that just means baby's coming. He's almost there. So then the labor and delivery nurse came in, and we started practice pushing. And I had a lot of concerns, like I said, that, I've been over medicated. I don't have enough control. I'm not going to be able to push. So they lifted up my legs. My delivery nurse was on one side. My husband was on the other, lifting my legs up. And she coached me through taking a deep breath and then pushing during the contractions. And on the very first push is actually when my water broke. And so it I didn't know this could happen, but kind of geysered out of me, and it more exploded than anything else, which was quite funny in the moment. And it gave me a lot of confidence that, my pushing is doing something. And so that was a good boost of confidence and a nice little laugh in the midst of everything. So at that point, because my water had broken, baby started kind of moving around and they lost the heartbeat with the monitor. So the nurse started to get a little nervous and she was moving the monitor around and she couldn't find the heartbeat. So she ran out this is where we started to get nervous. She ran out into the hall and she says, I need help here. I need help. And so 3 other nurses came in and they got me up on my side and they're moving the monitor all around and they can't find it. And they looked at each other and one of them just said, I don't know what to do. And that was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I was ready to be like, C-section now, let's do it. But they were like, well, let's go get the midwife. So they brought the midwife in and she was just exceptional. She gave it the intensity and intention it needed, but she was not stressed out or anxious. She said, okay, have we gotten her on all 4s yet? And they said, no, we haven't done that. She said, okay, that's what we have to do next. Let's get her on all 4s. And my legs are completely numb at this point. And the nurses are just standing there and they're like, okay, how do we do this? And somehow some crazy communication between my brain and my legs, I was able to do it by myself. I just flipped my body over and got myself up and I was in a tabletop position and the nurses were just kind of like, well, I don't know how that happened, but it happened. So that's good. And let's get that heartbeat. And so they were able to, he kind of came down into my belly again. And so they were able to get the heartbeat and everything was fine. They had just lost track, he had just kind of moved around a little bit. So then they put in that heart rate monitor that they kind of put into the head of the baby a little bit so that they wouldn't lose it again. And then I was able to flip back over. And then we started pushing for earnestly. So I spent about another 30 minutes pushing. And it actually was one of the most exciting, wonderful things that I've ever done. I loved pushing. It's one of my favorite memories. I always thought it would be incredibly painful and overwhelming and something that I would want to be over. And obviously I wanted it to be over because I wanted my baby there, but I actually felt like, wow, I'm doing this. I'm bringing my baby into the world. And I really got to be present and there was no pain for me at all. And my husband was just the most incredible coach. I'd always heard about eye contact during the actual birthing. And I was like, I don't like to make intense eye contact with people. I'm not going to need that. And then once the pushing started, I would just lock eyes with him and he would just say, go, you can do this, push, push, push. And it was an incredible connection moment between us. So I pushed for about 40 minutes. And then right before, as baby was just about to come out, there was another little heart rate drop. And my husband got very concerned about it and pointed it out to the midwife. Now, because I had heard so many birth stories, I knew that's very common. That happens right before the baby comes out. So to me, it wasn't super stressful. I just knew, okay, I have to keep pushing until he's here. And he came out and there was absolutely no issues with him. He was able to go right on my chest and start nursing right away. And it was just such a reward after such a long journey.
Oh, what a beautiful story, Elizabeth. And in terms of being the pelvic floor physio, I have to ask, any perineal tears or did they have to use forceps or vacuum or anything like that?
No forceps or vacuum. Again, my midwife was really, really exceptional. And I did have a little bit of tearing. And the midwife said, she said, it's I have to call it a 2, but I'd really call it like a 1+ if I could. So it was not too intense. One thing that did surprise me is how much time she spent doing the stitches. I thought, oh, it's just a 1. It's going to be a real quick little stitch, done. But she was very careful and took a lot of intention around it. And I just really, really appreciated that. And then I also had a little bit, I think she said a little bit of tearing in the labia, which I hadn't heard of before, but it was pretty minimal. But I think she was just telling me about it so that I wouldn't be worried later if I saw it or anything.
Amazing. So breastfeeding was good from the word go?
Yes, I was very pleased with how easy breastfeeding went for us. It definitely was painful early on. It felt more like chewing than nursing is what it felt like. But I think that's just the baby communicating to my body that I need to start producing milk. And so, I guess I should say on that first day, he struggled a little bit, not with his latch, but he was kind of choking a little bit. And so we talked to the pediatrician about it, and she recommended doing kind of suctioning out his stomach. That was very, very helpful to us. And we hadn't heard about that before, but once his stomach was suctioned out, he started feeding very, very regularly. And then my milk came in well within a couple of days. And I would say it was about 4 or 5 days of really being quite painful breastfeeding until it just became painless. And now it's just, incredibly easy. So it went better than I expected.
Oh, that's great to hear. And how was the recovery with all the stitches in the labia?
Mm-hmm. So I would say from the initial recovery, the recovery started very, very quickly. So I would say about 4 days after the birth, I was like, okay, this is better than being pregnant. Right. Like, because being pregnant is so challenging in and of itself that and then the birth does a lot to your body. But then about 4 days out, I was like, okay, I'm getting better and better and better from this point. And literally every single day was a step in the recovery. I did, because of Fit Nest Mama, I knew to seek out a pelvic floor therapist. So I actually had an appointment on the books long before I gave birth, and that was super helpful. So I started that 2 weeks out. And that was very helpful just to learn some breathing techniques and things like that to build on the basis that I learned in Fit Nest Mama. And I would say one thing that did surprise me is that I thought I would be a little bit more recovered at 6 weeks. And I would say it took me until about 3 months to be to the point where I'm like, okay, if it's like this for the rest of my life, I'm great. Like there's not really any significant recovery that needs to happen. So I guess I just thought at 6 weeks, things would be a little bit more all healed up, and they just had a little bit more healing to do. But now after 3 months, it's great.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And for everyone listening, 6 weeks is really just a drop in the ocean, isn't it? So for walking alone, I recommend 5 minutes each week extra. So 5 minutes week 1, 10 minutes week 2, 15 minutes week 3. That means by the time you get to 6 weeks, it's only 30 minutes of walking. So you're right, that is still very early stage recovery, getting to that point. So yeah, it's interesting to note. And when you say you felt your recovery wasn't as good, do you mean pain-wise in terms of where the stitches were, or what do you mean?
Yeah. At 6 weeks, I still had, so I would say that I did do a lot of horizontal rest, but I did not do much walking. And so that might have contributed to it. And so it might have just kind of delayed my recovery. The nice thing for me is that I didn't have to go back to work in an office or leave my home or get baby packed up for daycare. So I didn't need to snap back. I could have kind of a longer, slower recovery.
Yeah.
And so maybe if I'd walked more, maybe that would have made a difference. But I would say there were still positions that were a little bit painful to sit in at 12 weeks. If there was pressure on kind of the scar, I don't even know that it's a scar, on the tear that was repaired, if there was some kind of certain pressures on it. And then just that internally, I think externally it was mostly healed, but internally I could tell there's just things that were still painful if they were, pushed in the wrong way and things like that. Yeah. So it was I think it was a lot of the internal muscles where some were overactive, some were underactive and things like that.
Yeah, right. And so you're now at 4 months.
Yes.
Give us a bit of a snapshot. What's happened? Like, how has adjustment to motherhood been over the last 4 months?
It has been blissful. It has been an absolute delight. I thought it was going to be more challenging than it has turned out to be. Partly that's probably because my baby is a relatively easy baby. I know he didn't have colic. He doesn't have any allergies. He hasn't had any significant conditions that have required any intervention or anything like that. Didn't have a tongue tie, all those kinds of things that you're looking for early on. And so that was great. I also had my mother move to the town where we live. She didn't move into our home. She rented a place. My mom and dad moved out here for 2 months, which is
beautiful.
An absolutely incredible thing. And that allowed me to really focus on being a mom. And they took care of the cleaning and the cooking. And my dad cooked tons of meals for us. And my mom would also help us, putting baby down in the way that we wanted to, so that we wouldn't, when we were too tired, she would help out a ton. So that made a huge difference. And I also did not get a significant amount of time off from work because I own my own business. And so I think I had my first work call a week after the birth, and I wasn't doing 8 hours a day or anything, but I was definitely doing, 3 hours a day. And that was definitely a little challenging, but I have now found that I can balance working from home with my own business and taking care of my baby, especially because my husband runs the business with me. So we're able to kind of, one of us does the morning that's work focused and the other, is taking care of the baby, and we'll trade off like that. And physically,
and you mentioned,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I was just going to say, you mentioned off air that since becoming a mother, you've noticed you're a lot more efficient, and you're much more picky with what work you take on, which is great.
Yes, I'm very selective with my time, and I've really made a commitment to show up honestly. So if I'm in a meeting and my baby is, in his play area next to me, I'll tell people that. I don't try to pretend anything's, happening that's not happening. And people really enjoy that kind of true authenticity. And they love seeing a baby, So, and really, I had heard so much about when you're a mom, you lose your identity and you lose yourself. And so that was one of the things that had always made me ambivalent about being a mom prior to starting this journey. And maybe it's because I have only one baby so far, but I have not found that. I found that I've really been able to come into myself. I haven't lost my identity. I've gotten to really, settle into who I am and really just, again, show up authentically with my baby, with my son, and also focus on, if I need time to go do my thing outside of the house, I can tell my husband, hey, this is really important to me. It's something I'd really like to make happen tomorrow. What do we need to do together in order to free up my time to make that happen? He is great in supporting me in that. And we're able to really, really communicate. I don't feel like I'm the primary caregiver and he's helping me. I feel like we are really, truly co-parenting together. So I think that makes a big difference, is having a partner like that. And I also think having just one baby helps. Once you have 3, I know it becomes a little different.
Yeah, such an amazing journey. And I'm sure your journey to becoming pregnant has also contributed too, right? It's a very different story compared to the mum who unexpectedly became pregnant. It's just a totally different situation. So it's interesting. Now, I interrupted you before. You were going to talk about something about physically at this stage.
Yeah, it has been such a delight to feel like I have my body back after pregnancy. And I loved being pregnant. I took great delight in it. And now I'm taking great delight in being able to lift things without having to think about it, and getting back into workout programs. And so now I'm back to doing some of that more intensive weightlifting that I used to do, that I really, really love. And the great thing about what I've learned from you is that I can now integrate that I can integrate pelvic floor work as I'm weightlifting, right? Which to me, that's what it's all about. Because I have trouble finding, okay, I'm going to do, my weightlifting. I'm going to think about like, ooh, what kind of pelvic floor work can I do during this? Do I want to try to do an endurance hold during the whole thing? Or do I want to do some quick pulses as I'm doing something a little bit more rapidly? And that just understanding the pelvic floor in a more holistic way that you teach has really helped me integrate it more into my life, or even as I'm walking around or picking up baby and things like that.
Oh, that's music to my ears, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's just, you've taken your recovery intentionally. You've done that postnatal rehab. You've built yourself up to a stage where you're now back to doing what you love. Like, that is the ultimate. So well done. 5 stars. So to finish off with your incredible story, what final words of wisdom or advice do you have for mums who are listening, who are perhaps wanting to become pregnant, they're in that fertility journey or are pregnant?
I would say really listen to yourself and don't be scared because of what you've heard from someone else's journey. Only take the things from other people that are useful to you, and leave everything else behind. And you can do a lot more than you expected. Even if challenges come your way, you're totally, completely capable of navigating those and becoming more yourself and more who you are by going through those challenges.
Oh, what a beautiful way to end this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today, Elizabeth. I do appreciate the time that you have spent and, honestly sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for everything you do to get this message out there to pregnant women or women who hope to conceive. Like, without you, I would definitely not have gotten a pelvic floor therapist. I would not be at the stage of recovery that I'm at, for sure. And that is a huge part of our journey, not just for this first baby, but for the second embryo that we are hoping to transfer soon. I feel so completely confident in my body that it's ready to go again. Like, I have recovered and we're ready, and you're a part of that. So thank you so much.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Elizabeth. And good luck for the future. Might have to have you back on for round 2 of another podcast episode, but do stay in touch, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links at fitnessmama.com/podcast. And don't forget, if you're interested in returning to running after birth, then don't hesitate to download the free checklist that is available. Check the link in the show notes. That's it, everyone. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.